Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our fourth and final panel of the day. Thank you all for being here once again. We've got a wonderful panel of market leaders in employee ownership here, and in just a moment, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland will be joining us to give some brief remarks. While we wait for the senator, I'll kick us off on the topic of the panel. This is about owning the future and creating the next generation of employee owners. And as we've heard, first of all, you met me earlier. I'm Jack Moriarty. I'm supporting the Institute, and I'm also, in my day job, the founder and executive director of Ownership America, which is a nonprofit public policy organization, a think tank focused on scaling employee ownership, and in particular doing so through addressing access to capital issues and financing issues from a policy standpoint. And so that's why I'm so thrilled to be here with, as I mentioned, 4 market leaders that are already in the capital markets working on this, in some cases at the forefront, or representing investors that want to see more opportunities to invest in employee ownership and grow the field. With that, I'd love to introduce our featured speaker, Senator Chris Van Hollen. Senator Van Hollen is the junior United States Senator from the state of Maryland. The senator has been a strong proponent of equal rights, equal justice, and equal opportunity. He's been a champion of creating an economy based on good, quality jobs, which includes, of course, his tremendous support of employee ownership. The senator started his time in public service as a member of the Maryland State Legislature, and he's admired by leaders in both parties for his commitment to bipartisanship, which includes his lead sponsorship of the recently introduced bipartisan bicameral Employee Equity Investment Act, which he will discuss with us shortly. Thank you, Senator, for being here and for your leadership in promoting this issue.
Well, thank you, Jack, for that very warm welcome. Even more, thank you and others in this room for your focus on trying to grow the number of employee-owned businesses in the United States of America. And I'm really grateful to the organizers, to Rutgers and the Aspen Institute for convening this, because I think this is an essential and important issue for the future of our country. And I'm glad you've already had the opportunity to hear from some of my colleagues from the House and the Senate, and I apologize if I repeat some of what they said. I do want to give a special shout out to my colleague and senior senator from Maryland, Ben Cardin, who I think was here earlier, who of course chairs the Small Business Committee. I'm going to miss him. He announced his retirement, but I keep telling him he's got another 18 months. And one of the things we're going to work on in those 18 months is employee ownership. And he, of course, has been active in this area, including the legislation he probably talked about in terms of providing more tax incentives for employee ownership. Look, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to convert all of you on the benefits of employee ownership. I'm guessing that you're here because you already understand how important it is. But I do just want to highlight and summarize some of the things we do know, which is all the evidence indicates that when you have employee ownership of a business, productivity of employees is up. Resilience is strengthened because if you look at these companies, when the economy goes bad or tough times hit, they find a way to more easily adapt. And of course, there's more shared prosperity. And that makes common sense because all those employees not only have a stake in getting their next paycheck, but they have a stake in the success of the company and the wealth that can be built from the company. So that, of course, is the fundamental idea, is to have more shared prosperity, and the figures bear it out. Employee owners retire with about 3 times the assets of employees that are not part of employee-owned businesses. So this is clearly a good thing for the workers. It's a good thing for our communities. It's a good thing for the country. But we don't have a lot of them. If you look at the share of employee-owned businesses in the economy overall, it's pretty small, and it's been flat for about 10 to 15 years. In Maryland, for example, we have 125 companies that are employee-owned. They're really good, but 125 out of thousands and thousands of companies in Maryland is obviously a small figure. So we know it's a good thing. What are the barriers? And there are a couple barriers. One is education awareness. I mean, there are lots of small business owners who are not familiar with this model. And that is something we all need to work on. Another is complexity and the legal challenges of converting. And there are substantial legal challenges that people have to go through in order to make this kind of conversion. And third, and most of all, of course, is the financing, the capital that you need to bring to the table. If you're an owner and you're selling your business, if there's not another source of capital out there, you, of course, have to self-finance it. And that means that first of all, you have to be in the position to self-finance it, and it usually means that your return on that sale to your employees takes place over a much longer period of time than obviously if someone swooped in from the outside, a private equity firm, and just bought it, right? And then you have your cash out and you're done. But if you're an owner who really does want to leave that company in the hands of the people who have made it productive for you, you want to both know about this option. You want to we should find a way to streamline the conversion, and we want to find a source of capital to really address that very big issue. And so we've introduced legislation that aims to tackle these issues, especially the financing issue and access to capital. It's called the Employee Equity Investment Act. I'm very pleased that it is bipartisan. So in addition to a number of my fellow Democratic senators, we also have on board Senator Rubio, Senator Young, Senator Braun, and a lot of them have important roles now and in the past on the Small Business Committee, which turns out to be the place that this legislation will go. So I'm very pleased also to have my senior senators chairing that committee. And as I said to him, he's got 18 more months here. We got to get that passed. I understand you've heard a little earlier today from Jim Bonham with the ESOP Association. We've worked closely with people like Jack and with people at the ESOP Foundation as we put this together to try to address a lot of the issues which obviously come up when you're trying to do something. And we settled on this idea of using an existing model, using an existing platform at the Small Business Administration. And the current platform is called the Small Business Investment Company Program. And it was established decades ago because of the challenges small businesses were having to access capital. They were smaller, they were riskier, they didn't necessarily have a big track record. And so by law, this was established to help provide incentives for others to bring capital to the table. But at the end of the day, those who are bringing capital to the table are actually financing the costs of the program itself and are also taking the greatest risk ultimately because their capital is what's burned through first before you get to any guarantee from the Small Business Administration and the government. So we use that platform and we want to build on it to not only encourage investment in small businesses, but specifically target investment for the purpose of establishing employee-owned businesses and helping those that are trying to expand the number of employees participating in the business. And these are called the Employee Equity Investment Companies. That's the parallel to the Small Business Investment Companies. And it's important that we launch this now because we are experiencing major demographic changes around the country. I suppose others have probably spoken about the silver tsunami already. But right now we're projected to see that the owners of 2.9 million small and local businesses employing 32 million Americans are likely to retire soon. This is the baby boom generation of small business owners, and they're going to be retiring. So what's going to happen to all those small businesses? It's very possible that outside private equity firms will come in. And, you know, somebody on Wall Street may say, hey, that's a really good target. That obviously is not going to make the employees owners there. And a lot of these small businesses, as you all well know, are also connected to our communities, contributing to our communities. They're our neighbors. They're part of the Little League. They're part of the social fabric of a community. And it makes a difference to have the employees as owners and also owners who are part of the surrounding community. And so given what we're facing in terms of the silver tsunami, we think it's really an important moment to move on this effort. If you look at the current figures in terms of ownership, at least of public companies, you'll find that 40% of U.S. corporate stock is owned by foreign nationals. And our goal is to make sure that as these small businesses, their owners retire, that instead of being bought up by private equity firms, including a lot of folks who may be foreign investors, that the investors be the employees themselves, and that the beneficiaries be the employees themselves. And so that is what this is all about. It's about making sure that we can achieve this goal that everybody talks about, but it's always been hard as you look at the trends over time to accomplish, which is of more shared prosperity. And I understand if we pass this legislation, we're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and see everything transform, but by providing this mechanism, I am absolutely convinced that over time, we will definitely see the growth of employee-owned businesses. We got to take away we got to make it more, people more familiar with the model. We got to get rid of some of the legal barriers while also making sure that we're protecting employees. And this bill, in my view, does exactly that. And we've got to address this big financing piece. So thank you all for devoting this time to this goal. And I hope all of you will join our efforts and encourage all of our colleagues to pass it. And I do want to thank our House members who are leading the effort. Dean Phillips and Blake Moore are the primary co-authors. Christy Houlihan, I don't know if you heard from her yet, but she's also a co-sponsor in the House. So whatever you can do, I mean, you can be our best ambassadors here in terms of reaching out to other members to make sure that we get this over the finish line. And I do think there's a lot that we're not going to be able to do in the next 2 years, given the sort of political division. But the fact that we have bipartisan support for this bill makes it different than a lot of other proposals that are out there. So we really want to invite you to be part of this, this effort. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And I do want to thank Harry Stein, who's right here in the back, who's really put an enormous amount of effort as my point person on this. Thank you all.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much, Senator, and thank you, Harry. I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to introduce our esteemed panel. I'll also note that Congressman Dean Phillips will be joining us a little bit later on. So part of the dance is we'll maybe have to pause things and bring the congressman in, but that's how we roll here. So as I mentioned, this the senator's comments a perfect segue to thinking about how do we address financing barriers, and I'm thrilled to be introducing my colleagues to my right. Starting with Regina. Regina Carls is a managing director of the ESOP Advisory Group at J.P. Morgan. She is dedicated to helping bankers and their privately held clients evaluate the benefits of selling stock to an ESOP and therefore creating liquidity for the owners in the transaction. Regina was responsible for the initial development of the ESOP Advisory Group. She quickly became a liaison with all areas of the firm, assisting in the analysis and structuring of complex ESOP financings. Regina has been with J.P. Morgan for 30 years. Prior to spearheading the advisory group, she was a division manager within middle market banking. She has gained broad experience during her career with the firm and received a bachelor's degree of finance from the University of Iowa and holds a Master of Business Administration from DePaul University. She is licensed by FINRA with a Series 24, Series 63, and 79. She's a recognized expert and frequent speaker in the ESOP community, and in 2014 was appointed to the advisory committee of ESCA. She's a member of the ESOP Association headquartered here in D.C. and serves on their Banking and Finance Committee. And finally, Regina is an active member of the National Center for Employee Ownership and Ohio Employee Ownership Center. To my immediate right, Bill is a founder and partner. Bill Hayes is a founder and partner at Mosaic Capital Partners, an employee ownership-focused private equity firm. He currently sits on the board of directors of Express Medical Transporters, eTax Systems, and Lynx Global Solutions. Prior to founding Mosaic Capital, Bill was head of corporate credit for Deerfield Capital Management and managing director with Babson Capital Management. Bill is a graduate of the Citadel, where he was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army. Mosaic Capital provides mezzanine debt and equity to middle market companies with greater than $10 million in revenues for change of control transactions. Bill and his team recognize that a family-owned business is more than a means of wealth creation. It's the manifestation of optimism, determination, and a willingness to take risks, key values worthy of passing on to the next generation of family management and employees. Todd Leverett is a co-founder of Apis and Heritage Capital Partners, an impact-focused private equity firm that looks to address the nation's racial wealth gap by using the power of employee ownership. Prior to co-founding Apis and Heritage, Todd was the program manager of legacy business initiatives at the Democracy at Work Institute, a national nonprofit that leverages employee ownership models as tools for racial and social equity. Todd is also a former Wall Streeter, startup co-founder, and independent business consultant who has dedicated his life and career to leveraging the tools and best practices of big business to empower communities of color. He received his JD MBA from Columbia University and is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Morehouse College. And last but certainly not least, John Cochran is Senior Manager, Policy and Programs at the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization dedicated to building the impact investing ecosystem by bridging market gaps and addressing shared challenges. At the Alliance, John helps to lead a range of program areas, including public policy advocacy, investor engagement, and education, and the work of the Global Steering Committee Group on Impact Investing. Prior to joining the Alliance in 2017, John was Associate Director for Social Innovation at the Council of Foundations, where he created an impact investing program to educate and train community, corporate, and private stakeholders. He's also worked with the Inter-American Development Bank, White House Business Council, the U.S. State Department, and Morgan Stanley. So thank you all for being here. I'd love to kick things off with a sort of a macro question. All of you are either directly operating in capital markets or you're directly adjacent. If you could start, and we'll start with Bill and go down the row here, just give us a sense of the ESOP market. We know the demographic challenges. We know some of the interest rate environment. The Fed met earlier today and paused on a rate increase, but we've certainly seen a lot of changes from a monetary policy standpoint. Give us a sense of what are you seeing in the market and tell us more about your specific investment strategy.
As an SBIC, we're more focused on the lower middle market and kind of the beginning of the true middle market. Sorry about that. Can you hear me? Closer? All right, we'll try this. Not used to doing this, folks. As I was saying, we are a small business investment company, so by the very nature of that, we're focused on the lower end of the middle market. Typically, our companies have 5 to 8 million of EBITDA, so that's pretty small business. We've done 16 companies since 2013, created over 2,600 employee owners through that process. And we are in the licensing process for our second fund to do that very strategy. Having said that, we're a bit of an odd duck at SBA. We're the only fund licensed to do this at this point. We typically, different than long ago where you used shoe leather, you went and you met business owners and you started pitching ideas, most companies that we see are now represented by investment banks. Some big banks, some small, local, niche. And the goal is to drive the highest value for the owner of that business. And as a result, we compete with other private equity funds that might be looking to buy a company of that nature, as well as strategic buyers, so larger companies or companies looking to roll up and add to their business line. And so we have to be competitive in that process. And some of the unique features of ESOP transactions allow us to do that. I think one of the biggest impediments that we consistently see is because we bring capital, we know banks, other funds that help raise the capital needed to do the transaction, but it's getting a price that those sellers are willing to transact. They don't want a partial exit from their business. They would like full liquidity because they're doing estate planning and other things that they would like to move on with the business. And in our transactions, we're typically able to get them about 90% of the liquidity. We do like to have them roll over a piece so that our interests are aligned with theirs over time. And often we see them involved in the business post-sale of the transaction, at least for a few years, but often throughout the life of our investment. And I think the others will say that that's probably the biggest impediment to convincing a seller to do an ESOP is the ability to get full liquidity of the transaction versus taking the seller notes that Jack had mentioned earlier.
So as Jack mentioned, can you guys hear me? Okay.
Try it
It's
again.
on.
Try it again, Richie.
It's red.
Try it.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. So as Jack mentioned, I head up our ESOP advisory practice for the commercial bank, and our team has been around. I founded the group 16 years ago. I started on the commercial side working with business owners, financing corporations my whole career, and always looked at this. We were the benefit of a lot of practitioners who are in the room here today, some good work that's been done to really expose the market to ESOPs. And it was interesting, when I got started, it was one of those areas that I approached the bank 3 times to start a practice group, and twice was turned down, told that it was, not a big enough market, that we did ESOPs within our portfolios. But the reality was we did them, but I don't think we knew what we were doing. And I said it's really the least understood corporate finance tool out there. And so fortunately, after the three's a charm, they came back and asked me to really greenfield a group. And I've been doing that for 16 years. It's been a very successful group within our commercial bank. And I would agree, I think starting with awareness, I've heard that multiple times today. I think back when I started the group, awareness was a big issue. People hear of it, they don't really understand it. The other piece of it, I'd say, is it's dispelling the myths. There's, you always talk about the financial advisors who have the ear of the owner, and many times when you talk about an ESOP to these owners, they'd say, "Oh, I talked to my accountant. They said that's not the option to go, or you can't get what they're representing, or an ESOP causes a company to fail." And I quickly come back to the argument that it's not an ESOP that causes a company to fail. Companies go through cycles. We work in the banking industry. Clients have problems. It's how you work through those problems. And I would argue that the ESOP structure, especially in this 100% S structure, actually gives them a little bit more of a tax shield to sustain some of that volatility. And as a result, we've seen great performance within our portfolio. And I think when I talk to my other competitor peers out there, we all can share in that, and we can talk about that in a little bit. As far as the capital restraints, I would agree that there are transactions where that will limit business owners who may want to get more cash at close. So I would say it's not the entire universe, and I can look at some people in the room here who've gone down the route who actually enjoy a bigger seller financing component to transactions. So it's really bringing capital to bear, and I can talk about a transaction where that came in, whereas it was important based on the age of the owner. But I think overall as a space, the awareness is there. I would say, it's going back to my role as an advisor. We're an advisor group within the commercial bank. That's exactly what we're doing. We're spending our time going across the country, meeting with our bankers and underwriters, our private bankers, to really educate them on what is an ESOP. Because I think most people, and before I started this role, I can tell you when you say what is an ESOP, people would say ESOP. Beyond that, they didn't want to have to get into the weeds. And I think the technicalities of an ESOP at times may scare companies off, may scare bankers off, because you do have to invest in it. And that's why we set our group up the way we did, that we work exclusively with ESOPs, and we don't just get in the transaction at the initial formation, we're staying in through the life of the loan. And I think the other difference with my team is, they always say surround yourself with talent. I have some exceptional talent on the team. When you look at what is involved in an ESOP transaction, it's various disciplines. And I have former valuation practitioners. I have a former ERISA attorney, trustee. I've got actually an individual on my team that used to be CEO and CFO of an ESOP company. And so, we're seeing more and more of this, and more banks are entering the space, which I think, although somebody mentioned it's good for us that know how to underwrite to an ESOP company, the reality is every bank should understand this, because they do have the ear of these owners, and they need to be able to represent this as a viable transition, because the last thing we want to be doing is terminating ESOPs because they didn't know what they were doing.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Todd Leverett. I'm co-founding partner of Apis and Heritage Capital Partners, and as Jack mentioned, we're a lower middle market buyout fund that focuses on converting closely held, privately held companies to employee-owned. One thing that makes our firm unique is that we focus on companies with diverse workforces. So we will only convert companies that have at least a third of their workforce being a BIPOC workforce, and we also focus on those workforces that are majority low and moderate income. So to date, we have 2 companies within our portfolio, a landscaping company in El Paso and a plumbing company in Denver that represent almost 250 families. Over 80% of the workers are BIPOC, and the majority of the workers are low and moderate income. So we really see this as, I think everybody here sees this not just as a solution for owners, but also for workers who need opportunities to build wealth, who've been locked out of those opportunities by other means, of who are diverse and not diverse. Every worker within our portfolio gets to participate. I'll take a step back when we talk about the state of the ESOP market, and Senator Van Hollen talked about this before. I like to kind of just frame it as 2 pieces. There's a big opportunity, and there's a big risk, and often those are the different sides of the same coin. So the opportunity is really related to there are, especially in the lower middle market where Bill and I play, there are a lot of companies that are that need to transact. A lot of sellers who need to exit. And y'all have probably heard Silver Tsunami 100 times a day, so I won't say that, but I'll kind of say it. When you look at the market for especially lower middle market transactions, there are just huge amount of opportunity. And on the risk side, there's a ton of, over $1 trillion of dry powder in traditional private equity spaces, looking to consolidate that wealth building power in the hands of a relatively small number of folks. And then you have other models that are able to take that wealth building power and make sure it's dispersed a little bit more broadly. Again, not to talk negatively about our traditional private equity partners, but I think when you're an investor, when you are an economic developer, somebody who's thinking about not just returns on investment, but all the externalities that come along with where capital goes. And I think, I think about if you're a state pension fund, investing in something that's not just getting you return on your dollar, but that's also preserving jobs in the state that you care about. So making sure your outcomes are aligned with your investment is really important. And we think this model does that in spades when done the right way. So tremendous opportunity, but also tremendous risk in that if we don't jump on the opportunity, then we probably won't have a window of investment like this with all these businesses looking to change hands for a long time, if ever. So happy to be here today. Yeah.
John, I'll bring you in as someone who's sitting in a little bit of a different position, representing investors that care about impact, but they also are competitive investors. They want attractive risk-adjusted returns. How do you view the intersection of employee ownership and the other priorities of your investors? What's the appetite for seeing more investment opportunities in this field? And I'd love to give your perspective on those issues.
Yeah, thank you. There we go. And I think I'm in the unenviable position of probably knowing the least on this panel about employee ownership, but I know the most about how to work the microphone, having watched everyone else. So, well positioned. So yeah, as Jack said, I sit at the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, and to say just a bit more about who we work with, we represent a range of investors, including foundations, high net worth individuals, increasingly corporate investors, corporate venture capital funds, and the like, who are seeking to invest their capital to achieve financial returns, as Jack was just saying, positive financial returns, but also to achieve positive and measurable social, economic, or environmental impact through those investment decisions. In addition to the asset owners that we work with, we also have a number of intermediaries, wealth platforms, fund managers, et cetera, who are represented on our various advisory boards and councils. And so collectively, our asset owners hold hundreds of billions of dollars in capital, and the managers are responsible for trillions of dollars in capital. And across that, there is a broad range of expectations for what they're going to achieve through their investment decisions. And so when you talk about impact investing, sometimes it can be hard to pin down what that says, and we're not always helpful because we do look across the spectrum from folks who are, willing to really make concession to achieve the impact that they're seeking. But as Jack was pointing out, it definitely goes through to folks who are looking at sort of attractive market rate returns. And so why did we get involved? Since, as I said, I don't know all that much about how to actually structure an employee-owned company. That's not my role. What brought us to it? And I think Senator Van Hollen started to bring it up. Todd was mentioning it. There is obviously this silver tsunami conversation, but it goes beyond that too. There are so many other factors that I think make this a critical conversation right now, and one that the investors that we represent are extremely interested in. So you could look at everything from the lingering effects of the COVID crisis and the disproportionate impacts that had on small businesses, especially minority-owned small businesses. You could look at the sort of supply chain challenges that highlighted, and how we need to think about keeping the sort of small producers that are doing good work in this country in place, so that we push back on that and grow them and make sure that there's an opportunity to grow into all of the opportunities that are presented to us with the sort of ongoing economic transitions that we see. Our president at the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, Fran Siegel, who unfortunately couldn't be here today just because of scheduling, she had the chance to sit on the Good Jobs Initiative that we heard about earlier from our Department of Labor colleagues. And so that is really, the confluence of those macroeconomic changes, the desire that we see from investors to pursue these positive social, economic, and environmental impacts, and the commitment that we see right now from government to promote good jobs. That really brought us into this thinking about, okay, what is the role that investors could be playing? And employee ownership was a really natural extension of that. So we have seen just incredible interest from the members that we work with, the investors that we work with, in being able to be a part of this growing conversation about employee ownership. But to pick up on what Regina was talking about, these are not, there's a lot of, and what we heard about earlier in the panels that I was able to attend, there's a lot of capacity needed to be able to do this right, to do this well. And you're not going to build that out inside of a foundation. You're not going to build that out inside of a family office. You need to be able to work with the kinds of sophisticated capital markets intermediaries to my left, who are able to do these deals well, to structure funds that are going to be successful. And so that's what our members are eager for, and what I think, the policy being advanced by Mr. Van Hollen and his colleagues presents an opportunity for, is to get more of those sort of critical intermediaries in place that really build the infrastructure so that we can do more of these deals, because the interest is there from the capital that we work with, but they sort of need the opportunities presented to them.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, John. We've heard a bit now, both from the senator's remarks, from the congresswoman earlier, and others about this seller financing barrier, and how transactions, when you have a sponsor, a fund sponsor that is putting forward an ESOP strategy, that it's an unusual, it's a bit different than your traditional structure. So I'd love, Bill and then Todd, and then I'll bring in Regina. I'd love to just a little bit more in the weeds on, how does that actually look in practice? Bill, you'd mentioned that you are participating in auction processes with traditional intermediaries, right? That is an unusual place often for the ESOP model to play. Tell us about that experience.
When we set out, can you hear me now? When we set out with this strategy, which started back in late 2011-12, we felt we were trying to serve this niche that had not been served by the capital markets, because these companies are great investments. for all the reasons we have discussed, but pretty much ignored by the normal capital markets with regard to the junior capital. And so we went through the process to get licensing, but our structures look really no different than any private equity buyer or strategic. We raise some senior debt from banks, which is 25 or 30% of the total purchase price. We work with other funds. Many of them are SBIC funds that do traditional mezzanine debt, kind of junior debt lending. And then our fund provides the junior capital, which would typically be funded by the equity block from a private equity fund. We use some of the unique laws around ESOPs to make that investment where we don't own the company work out economically. So we're getting equity-like returns. But in the process of doing that, we're creating a significant value to the employees that they don't have to pay for. The management, ourselves as kind of a sponsor, and the outside directors that we bring in sit on a board and really guide strategy and solve problems and bring resources to bear at the company level. So in that regard, we don't look terribly different than a typical buyout, but the structure of our securities is different. The new act takes account of that, and we've been able to make it work. I think that's pretty much all I'd say on the structure.
And what I'll add to that, to do the compare and contrast to traditional private equity, I'll talk about our transactions, but I'm sure a lot of it applies to yours as well. On day one of the transaction, when the senior lender brings in the capital, our team brings in the capital, as soon as the papers are signed, the company is not owned by Apis and Heritage or not owned by Mosaic. And just want to accentuate this point, Bill. It's 100% owned in most cases. We can go down to 80 by the workers at the firm. And we will sit on the balance sheet, so to speak, as a mezzanine debt product. So it's really important for the model, for several reasons, for these companies to be 100% employee-owned on day one. One, I think that the fact that they are in reality 100% employee-owned is very meaningful, not just to us, but it's very meaningful to the employees and to the workforce. And so one of the first things we do is bring in our artistic director from the fund, and they add the words 100% employee-owned to the logo. That's the first change that happens. Old logo, just add 100% employee-owned. But what I think that represents is this concept and idea. I know that we espouse at A&H that ownership is you can set up the cool, retirement account, but real ownership is more than that. And if you really want to see a lot of the improvements, and the research shows this, that you see in employee-owned companies where they're able to withstand downturns better, where they lay off less employees, where they grow faster, it's really important to pair with that cool ESOP retirement account. Start to really create a culture of ownership with those workers. And this is something you can do whether or not you have an ESOP or not, but it's a lot more effective when the financial reality is ownership. And so really coming in, and our partner, DOWI, Democracy at Work Institute, comes in, partners with us in these firms, and starts to create a ownership culture where these workers really start to see the connection between their life and their well-being and the quality of their jobs, and connect that with the success of the company. I think I'm way far off the question. But the idea is on day one, 100% employee owned, but until you really start to build that culture of ownership, in our heads it's not 100% employee owned, till the workers understand it, and until it starts to change the way that they engage with their work and make the business better. So the financing and the reality of the culture kind of go together.
Well, let's turn our attention. We, of course, heard from the Senator on the Employee Equity Investment Act and others today. First, Bill and then Regina. Bill, you sit in a unique position given that you are an SBIC licensee. You have some experience with the program. Tell us about what that experience has been like. I know you operate a little bit differently than your traditional SBIC fund. So, tell us a little bit more about the SBIC program. Senator Van Hollen gave us a little bit of background context, your role, and then where you see the opportunities in the EIA to accelerate its potential.
Sure. Just a little bit of background. The SBIC program was established, I think, in 1958, and the goal was to have private capital and the government partner to provide capital to smaller businesses in order to, as you well know, most employees are employed by small businesses, but the goal was to energize the economy and grow. And so that's been a hugely successful program. Most SBICs, and there's 350 or so at any given time, are focused on mainly mezzanine debt. Some provide more senior debt, similar to banks, because some companies' banks aren't interested, but SBIC funds will often step into that based on the profile of the company. Some of those funds will do small pieces of equity-like investments, and there are a few that maybe do 50%, 50%, but there aren't many of those. So when we came into the program, effectively making debt investments that look like equity, we were a bit of an odd duck, as I said earlier. And there's not a lot of institutional knowledge within SBA around ESOPs. They know a lot about small businesses and the things around that program, but not very, I would say, very little knowledge institutionally around ESOPs. And so we've spent a tremendous amount of time and effort educating them, both with our first license and then due to turnover of people, we've had to do that with our second license. And then there's turnover in their investment division that monitor and work with you throughout the life of your SBIC fund, that we continually do educational efforts there so that they understand the life cycle of an ESOP. How are they structured? How do you get in? Who are the parties to the transaction? What controls do you have as an investor? How do you get out of your investment? So we're continually doing that. And I think the Office of Employee Ownership that would be established by the bill would be huge in establishing that institutional knowledge and also enabling other management teams such as ourselves to use this program to bring more capital to the lower middle market. And in particular, I mentioned we'd done 16 companies, about 2,600 employees. That's working within the size standards of the current SBIC program. But with the new act, it would triple the size of the companies that you can invest in. So for the same effort that we put forth, we could have touched 3 times as many people. And so I think that's a big part of the new program.
Regina, from a senior lender's perspective, tell us a little bit about the potential opportunity of having more fund sponsors into the market in a more junior subordinated position, and also as you've gotten up to speed, where you see opportunity in the new legislation.
Well, I think, as we've said, the majority of our transactions today have gone this 100% S Corp ESOP route just because of the benefits afforded to that structure. We do have situations, as I mentioned before, that the additional capital that is needed to be brought to the table through mezzanine, additional cash at close, would encourage more business owners to consider an ESOP. It doesn't discourage overall companies from pursuing this path, but having more capital at the table would be impactful. I would say in the economic environment we're in right now, the other benefit would be risk, and the fact that as the banks, lending markets change, we've seen it from, recession to growth to recession, the bank markets change. And so the amount of financing that we're able to bring to the table will change as a result of the economic conditions. And having a layer of capital that could, basically bolster the capital structure to fulfill this ownership transition, I think would continue to drive more activity in the space. A lot of people ask me when the markets change, are we going to see ESOPs dry up? And the reality is, we did not. We see more transactions closing. They may go a predominantly seller finance route, and they wait till the markets improve, and they come back to the market and recap it through the senior markets. So it's just this to me would be a flexible tool to bring to the table, to bring some cash, because obviously that's important when anytime you're transitioning a business to the business owner wanting some capital at close. This kind of provides that layer of capital that we otherwise wouldn't have.
Todd, we've talked about relationships between subordinated lenders with banks. Tell us about the interactions with sellers, right? You've done a couple of deals now at least, and how that conversation has been that may not have been possible, right, potentially, if not for your capital solution.
Yeah, I'll tell you, even before we went into the market with this model, we wanted to get as much of a view and perspective of it as we could. So we spoke to the team at Mosaic, spoke to the team at American Working Capital, and some other folks who had engaged with sellers around the model. and what we heard from them is really what we experience, which is when you tell people, and I also had this experience working in the nonprofit world, when you tell people that there's a very real, tangible opportunity to move a business, the ownership of a business from the owner to the workers, I mean, the level of, first, confusion, because the concept of disbelief, confusion, because the idea, and I think this is part of the zeitgeist of ownership, and I think we live in the age kind of like the hero entrepreneur, right? Like only one person could have started this business, only one person can keep this business going, where the reality is if you have the right support, if you have the right leadership structure, if you have the right financing, and businesses can succeed with all that. But the excitement of an owner who has no idea where his or her business is going to go when they exit and leave. Are they going to have to sell it to the competitor down the street who they hate, who they never want to sell the business to, or to another sort of investment firm that they know is going to start cutting heads immediately? And it's funny, sellers always know who's going to get fired first when they sell to to a traditional buyer. And so to present them with an opportunity where the investor or the buyer is the workers, the next question is they can't afford it. And the capital that we bring to the table is what enables a workforce to be able to buy a company without coming out of pocket. So there's excitement first, or there's doubt first, and we talk sellers through that. And then the question is, am I going to be able to get the liquidity and the fair value for my business that I would have gotten otherwise? And sometimes that's the first question. So if you can get through all of those questions, make them feel confident that they can get fair value for their business and the liquidity that they need to retire and take care of their own families. If you can convince them that what you're bringing to the table, that opportunity is real, and really, just kind of let the excitement around the opportunity kind of go from there. I mean, the competitive of this model in the market, when you can make sure that folks are getting paid fairly, I think folks without the model should be nervous and worried as more capital comes into the space, because it's the most compelling value proposition for an owner that a lot of folks can imagine.
If I could just add to that, we haven't addressed the management team, which is who you're really going to work with going forward.
Yeah.
Hands down, management prefers the structure because they control their own destiny. When you go from a private owner to a private equity fund, in 3 to 5 years they're going to flip it, and you don't know what that means to you as the executive team or the senior management folks running the business. With an ESOP, you know what that outcome's going to be, and you have more control over your destiny. And I think that's a huge part. And often these businesses, the management team can really influence the seller as to which course of action to take. Because if they really believe in what we're suggesting, they may say, if you go that route, I think I'm going to leave. And if that's the key that keeps the private equity guy buying it, then there's some influence that can be had. It's very interesting, those dynamics, as you get into the transaction. We've also found, I don't know if you've experienced this yet, but by the time you get deep into the transaction, most of the owners have said, I think I'll roll over some of my investment or more than I thought I would, because I like what you're doing, and I'm very pleased with what you're going to do for my management team and my employees. And you don't really see folks wanting to put more money into a private equity deal, in my experience.
John, circling back to your observation that there's a lot of appetite for this and the investors that you organize and engage with. But I think the opportunity set is still small, right? We have a number of great early adopters, including those that are here today. But I think one of the things that the Alliance has been thoughtful about is using public policy as an opportunity to catalyze, right, new markets, new investment opportunities that again marry this high financial performance outcome and return outcome, but with issues like workforce and local job creation and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how public policy generally, and then in particular in employee ownership, can really catalyze the role of private investment.
Yeah, no, it's an important question, and I think we do always think really carefully about this, because our role is not to say the federal government should be subsidizing the investors that we work with. No, it's about enabling encouraging investors to think about the way that they can achieve these positive impacts that I talked about before. And fortunately, we have actually a really robust track record of the federal government doing just that, going back to the 70s, if you want to, between tax credit policy, between the Community Reinvestment Act, bringing banks into the mix, between some of the more modern things like up to opportunity zones recently. There are different ways that federal government can shine this spotlight on investable opportunities that really do catalyze a private market more than anything else. And I think actually the SBIC program, building off this established model makes a lot of sense for the new legislation, because we have seen that provide an opportunity for funds like Bill's to go through, it's rigorous. You're talking about it and you're going through it again, to show that, this is a solid fund that can manage private capital well. And so there's this really important spotlight effect that the federal government can play. And I think that's what we're seeing now. The senator who spoke earlier and the others who came really highlighting that employee ownership is something that should be thought about right now. And I think the other thing, as I was just listening to everyone else on here who does sit on the deal side, talk through this, that's so important, is that, and which we certainly hear from the impact investors that we work with, is you need alternative capital structures to make some of this work. Like if you really want to have the sort of deep impact that the folks we work with are seeking, traditional debt, traditional equity leaves just a gaping chasm in between for a lot of the communities and the businesses and the workers and the residents that we're trying to benefit at the end of the day. And so how the government can help to prove out these alternative models, that's incredibly important. We saw that again. I go back to so much of the experience from 2020 was critically important, because we saw a real fear from the investors that we were working with. They wanted, they had capital to deploy. They wanted to put it to work in the communities that were seeing shutdowns or sort of business disruptions, payroll disruptions. But they didn't want to over-indebt those companies. They didn't want to sort of shackle those companies. They wanted to grow them over time. And what they needed was an alternative approach. And so this is one alternative approach, and we hope that it'll continue to grow. And that spotlight effect will be really useful.
Well, thank you, John. And we'll momentarily pause our featured program to welcome our final member speaker and champion for the day. Hey, Congressman, how are you? No.
Well, I actually don't, my remarks are about 45 minutes, so. And I know you've been here probably for many, many hours, and I just want to say thank you. I come to this work from a background that's somewhat unique. Grew up in a business family. My great-grandfather, Jay Phillips, used to tell me regularly, he said, Dean, money is like manure. If you stack it up, it stinks, and if you spread it out, it fertilizes. And he reminded me time and time again that business is a means to an end. The end is not to aggregate as much capital as possible, rather to share as much possible with those who helped create it. And I've been working hard over 4.5 years here in Congress to find common ground between Democrats and Republicans. And I'm pleased to say that I think we have. You heard from my dear friend and colleague Blake Moore earlier. You know that Senators Van Hollen and Rubio are also leading this in the Senate. Some strange bedfellows, which is actually a darn good sign that we might be onto something. And I just want to thank every single one of you, our panelists, all of you here in the audience, for prioritizing, I think, something that could be transformational for our country. And if we can share success, create an ownership economy, we will have accomplished something that I think will be transformational in beautiful ways, socially, economically, and frankly, from a unification perspective, which our country needs more than ever. So those are my remarks. I have nothing else to share other than heartfelt gratitude for what you're doing. I am on this mission with all of you. I'm your friend, your colleague, your ambassador, and your humble servant. So with that, please call on me when I can, whenever you need anything, but also help us now, if you can, encourage our brothers and sisters on both sides of the aisle to get on board with this. Because if we do this together, I think it'll be an extraordinary legacy for every one of us and the communities in which we live. So thank you so much. I'm honored to be with you, and I hope I'm the last speaker of the day. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We really appreciate it. I think wrapping up here, I think why don't we go to some Q&A? I like Maureen's approach of 3 questions in a row. So Ken, why don't you kick us off, and then others feel free to raise your hand. And Mike is on the way. Thanks, Matt.
Starting early to do an ESOP at an early age and taking back some of the financing from a seller standpoint, and if you have banking relationships already with your line of credit and what have you, that means it's mezzanine financing. And so that means that you can get a higher interest rate. And correct me if I'm wrong, 9, 10, 11. So there's, from a seller standpoint, not that I did this, I found this out afterwards. That's an added benefit of getting a return on your investment. And number 2, if the selling shareholder stays with the company and is an employee of the company, he or she's getting the shares back free. And I'm not sure if everybody really talks about those 2 items, which if you start stacking them up into the spreadsheet and looking at private equity and looking at employee ownership, it certainly could maybe tip the scales, especially if share price is going up and you're getting those shares back free. So I just wanted to, I don't have a question, I have a, sorry.
I actually think I can frame what your question may have been, which is the debt service of the higher interest rates on the company's balance sheet as you continue to grow. My question is this, Chris, and you, and I forget your name, John, and Regina, nothing against you two, but you're in the private equity world, have other strategies, nothing bad, I appreciate what you're doing, have other strategies been evaluated to promote investment in employee ownership? One thing that comes to mind is, especially, John, when you were talking about it, was the historical preferential interest rates to banks to be investing in ESOPs, which gave a lower cost of financing. We've talked a lot today at the state levels, and there's been some extraordinary opportunities with state guarantees, credit as a credit enhancement, or linked deposits to provide lower costs of credit as well. And I would be interested in any discussions around other forms of capital enhancements to promote employee ownership.
And one more question.
I have to put this in the form. It's a comment with a disguised question. So I'll begin with the question: is this enough? A statistic which Dick May and I have and other friends have dug up, which was a little bit behind the idea of coming up with this bill, is that we believe that ESOP transactions are about 0.2% of M&A activity in the United States. So why are we doing this? We've got 7,000 ESOPs. It's been flat. The growth has been flat. We need to do something more, I think, to get from 0.2% to being a real competitor, a professional-friendly competitor with conventional private equity to do this kind of work. So my question is 0.2% enough? There we go.
Well, I'm going to just address that we've been flat, because I would argue that we do see growth every year. I mean, my team looks at, several $1 billion in transaction activity a year. the reality is we have a lot of M&A in the space. And then we do have companies who are very successful ESOP companies for a long period of time that are bought up by private equity. And, back to the comment earlier in the day, there's not bad private equity, and I think it benefits those employee participants. I mean, they had shares in the company, and there are certain companies that makes sense, that they maybe don't have a future, there's not a strategic that can acquire them, there's not a management team, and that alternative and bringing that capital in to buy out that company could be the best alternative for that company. So I just want to make the comment because I keep hearing that we're flat, we're not growing. I think there is growth, there is awareness. I think there's more awareness out there because I agree with you. It's still, a very small component of the M&A. And I think you're seeing more companies. I mean, I'm encouraged when I have my investment bankers come to me and say that, the business owners want to understand the strategic alternatives and they want to understand the ESOP. I had one situation where our investment banker was given that task. He came and the professional management team said, we really want to understand this ESOP. And after interviewing the family, coming back, they did, the traditional investment banking slide showing the half moons, what it can deliver, what it can't deliver. The ESOP always was showing that it wasn't delivering as much as the rest. And as the first question that was asked was, why is it that the ESOP is at the lowest, is the lower in the pecking order of all the other alternatives? And the investment banker said, well, because there's definitely more learning that needs to be done. And the board member said, well, isn't that why you're here? And I just had a big smile on my face because it is. I mean, it's a learning curve. We're fortunate we have a team within the bank that can help get up the learning curve. But it's also, many companies go through this dual track. They're beginning to look at an ESOP compared to a third-party sale. And I'll also argue that there's not always a strategic out there that's a fit for a business. And as we talked about, private equity isn't a full cash at close either. So I think it's alternatives. I think putting it on the spectrum of alternatives for any business owner is important, and I think that's what they're looking for. And truly, that's why our advisor group was set up. We're not a fee-for-service. We're set up to help advise. Obviously, at the end of the day, after we're doing the modeling, we want to do the financing. We'd love to invest the proceeds, but we're going at it we're agnostic. And business, it's not for every company, and we need to really understand the objectives of company owners, and they really want to understand what the options are, and from those options, make that decision in an unbiased way. But an ESOP should absolutely be on the level playing field with all the other alternatives.
And I'll respond to Ken's statement. I won't go into the weeds of the financing, but can you bring up a interesting point? One of the benefits of employee ownership of selling to an ESOP or even to a co-op or EOT is how much control it gives the seller in how and when they exit. The transactions that we do are typically the seller wants to exit completely. It's 100% buyout. What we're exploring and thinking about down the line was, what if you're an owner who has a company and you want to grow and you need financing to help your company grow, and the traditional capital markets have dried up, or they don't understand your business model, or you just can't find the capital? What does it look like to sell 30% of your company to your workers, get the capital needed to jumpstart this next idea in partnership with your workers and with your board, and then sell another 30% a year later? And Ken, you're an excellent person to talk to about this because that's kind of what you did with your company. But that level of flexibility is something that I think needs to be understood and talked about more. And as people, you should be thinking about your exit for your business over a 5, 10 or more year period. What does it look like to do 30% in year 5, 30% in year 7, 30% in year 10?
I'll try to address a couple of those questions. I think you're talking about getting warrants back with your notes, perhaps, as to you getting shares even though you were the seller of the business, or through the ESOP itself. Right. We're getting into the weeds a little bit, but there are some tax benefits that when Congress created ESOPs in 1974, among those, if you are a C Corp and you sell to your employees, you can get what's called Section 1042 deferral of your capital gains, much like if you sold your home and you roll your profits into a new home, you get to defer it. Same thing here. If you choose that, then you can't participate in the ESOP plan. You could have warrants associated with your note, but not participate in the plan. If you do not choose that and you stay, you could theoretically participate in the plan, but there are caps. You have a 409P testing and all that all ERISA plans have that could limit the economics to you. As to the rates on the notes, keep in mind, at least the way we're doing this, we're creating a 100% employee-owned business. They put nothing into it themselves. So we, as the junior capital providers, have to get equity-like returns for the capital that we're putting into it. And so the way we do that, there's a small cash pay component. Typically, it's about 4% on the note. And keep in mind, we're 40 to 50% of the capital, occasionally 60% of the total capital. So we're getting that. We're getting payment in kind interest that those two combined looks something like 14%. That payment in kind interest is taxable to our limited partners, which is a problem because we often don't get that paid until we exit. So 3-5 years down the road, it would be much better for us if the taxes on that PIK were not due until we got the cash, because it creates a drag on the returns to our limited partners. That would be huge. But it's a different side of Congress dealing with taxes. All we're asking is that you align the cash with when the taxes are paid. That's huge. I think it's one of the deterrents historically to other participants coming into these structures. What's unique about the SBIC program, and it goes back to the original intent, effectively by the government through the debentures that are issued but guaranteed by the government, the SBICs are paying the interest and principal on that. The government doesn't allocate money to it. It's self-funding. But there is a guarantee there to help reduce the cost of those debentures. Effectively, by having that leverage at your fund, you're helping enhance the returns to your limited partners. So just with small businesses that are risky, where you tend to lose more money, right, riskier, you're able to offset some of that such that your limited partners can get market-like returns and therefore attract that capital. Same thing goes when we're doing these ESOP investments. Because we're effectively giving 60% of the upside, we effectively have a warrant for about 40% of the company. That gets us to something like a 20% return for our equity capital, which is not even market, because most equity capital wants something like 25 to 35%. That's where the market is today. But we have to work for that. We have to earn that. And the leverage helps us achieve better returns for the limited partners while still giving a benefit for free to the employees. Therein lies the rub. You've got to bring market-like economics to something that they traditionally have not come into, and we think this bill really does that.
Well, Bill and others, thank you. You'll have the last word. Appreciate. Can we have a round of applause for the panel, please? And I'm pleased to hand it off to Joseph, who will introduce our closing speaker.
Okay, so thank you very much. We're moving into the sort of reflection part of the day. And let me just say, we have 3 books out there. They actually are for you to take to encourage your further reflection. We have a Aspen Rutgers research summary, which I'd like you to take a look at, because tomorrow we're going to move more into talking about research and ideas. As part of our first reflection, I'd like to introduce the Dean of the School of Management and Labor Relations, distinguished Professor Adrian Eaton. Adrian has been a wonderful advocate and supporter in developing the Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing, and I'm delighted to hear her thoughts.
When I first became dean, I think it was 6 years ago, which is hard to imagine. I learned that deans do a lot of welcomes. So today I get to do something a little more fun, actually, than welcoming, and to do a little reflection on the day. I'm concerned that that may also make Joseph nervous. We'll see, because I'm going to be a little bit off script. But I am going to say a few things from my original remarks from this morning. So to start, I'm just really pleased that we were able to co-sponsor this event and to work so closely with Aspen and the Aspen team. It's just been a really great day. And many people thanked Marianne Beister earlier in the day and the Beister family, and I want to add to that, but I also want to say more specifically that this program is partly a result of a conversation Marianne and I had outside the aquarium at the Scripps Institute in La Jolla last year on a very lovely day. And in addition to always appreciating Marianne's financial support, I also really deeply appreciate that what I will call a gentle push to come to Washington and to do a program like this. So again, thank you so much for that. Second thing I wanted to say that I would have said this morning is to say that as a state university, we don't advocate for particular policy proposals, and I think Aspen has that position as well. So we don't do that. Nevertheless, I will, and by the way, we do as individuals, we are certainly allowed to advocate for policies, just not as an institution. Given that, though, I'm going to say, listening today, I want to talk just quickly about what I heard about maybe not consensus, that's probably not quite the right word, but themes or areas of policy making that came up again and again. And of course, improving access to capital. We just heard from some of the funders and investors around that topic, making transactions and conversions easier, clarifying, relaxing, streamlining, depending on who you are, the rules and regulations. And it was so great to hear from the panel of agency representatives what academics sometimes call street-level bureaucrats, which is not at all meant to be an insult, but a very interesting area of public policy and public administration work, that the actual implementation of policy as important as the passing of original laws. And I think we were really hearing that today and hearing that threaded throughout the conversation, and I find that quite interesting. Incentives, of course, for employee ownership. And then awareness and knowledge, including for service providers and bankers, and then more research. And of course, we see the Institute, the school, as having a central role in the awareness and knowledge piece, and then the research piece. So we always like to hear people encouraging more research. A few other things that I thought about today that just kind of stood out to me. They may not have to you, but I really appreciated the discussion of the broader social benefits of employee ownership, and it strikes me that that's important to be thinking about in terms of the politics of policy making, right? So that there's a broader set of stakeholders in the communities where employee-owned companies operate. And we talked about resilience, adaptability, stability, the ability to respond in constructive ways to crises, community spillover, also known by economists as positive externalities, and a couple of what seemed to me to be kind of spillovers from the impact on workers, and that is companies with employee ownership that gives some primacy to financial literacy. That has spillover benefits for communities, for the workers with the financial literacy, but then to the communities in which they live and operate. And then one of my favorite topics, voice and influence in the workplace. And researchers actually know quite a bit about, or something about, the spillover effects of the workers' ability to have voice and influence participation in the workplace into community life. And it's very important for building active citizens or political participants. So those I think, are some of them. And then I guess, just at a conceptual level, that imagining Bologna and Emilia Romagna, I really loved that. And thinking, man, maybe we ought to learn more about that, Joseph, at a future conference. Just a couple of other things. The interplay between the different levels of government, particularly state government and federal government. So we've had a lot of emphasis. We're sitting in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C., but I think we've heard a lot today about experimentation at the state level, and that's so important generally, but important particularly in times of federal dysfunction. And then the old saw about states as the labs of democracy. So I think it's important that we kind of keep in mind these different levels of policy making and government along the way. One other thing, I guess I worry about a little bit that we're just preaching to the choir about this, but I do think even if we are doing a bit of that, that these events do help to create synergies, new ideas, new connections. I met someone today who I'm doing something that I'm really interested in myself and potentially as a research project in the future, just as an example. And then Richard Freeman and I were talking earlier this morning about just the hopefulness of programs like this. So even those of us who've been working in this vineyard for a long, long time, I think this was a very hopeful day, actually. And, you know, it can seem frustrating and maybe things are flat or, well, no, I think actually we're in a moment here, as a number of people have talked about. And so I think we need this kind of exchange to keep ourselves feeling hopeful. And then just a last thing, or maybe two last related things. Thank you to Joseph, of course, to Jack Moriarty, to Bethany. Is she in the back there someplace? Oh, outside. And anybody else from Rutgers who helped to make this possible. And just a final comment that we're hoping this is the first in a number of forums like this going forward. So we will have to discuss that further with Aspen and Joseph, but I think we're not done with this kind of investigation in this place at this time. All right, thank you.
Well, thank you, Adrian. That was really helpful, and I'm thrilled that you've been taking such great notes all day. So. So I just have a couple of things to say before introducing the last speaker for today. So first of all, it's the end of today, but it's not the end of the Employee Ownership Ideas Forum. We are again tomorrow in the Aspen Institute offices, which are at 2300 N Street Northwest, so over at the west end of the city. It's actually 24th and N, but somehow it's 2300 N Street. I don't really get that. But that's where we'll be tomorrow. Breakfast is available at 8:15, and we'll begin the program at 9 o'clock. And then I also want to thank, a huge thanks to my team in particular, the Aspen team, but to both teams, really. I mean, this is a lot of work putting these things on, and there's a ton of things people are doing. You saw them, you know, getting all these name badges done and handing them out and directing people the right way to go, making sure there's food for everybody to eat. I want to do a particular call out to my colleague, Matt Helmer. Matt, you know, has been a thought partner on this throughout, as well as sort of making sure all of the logistics work. He's sort of the everywhere, every place, everywhere, all at once, or whatever it is person. I'm sure you've seen him. You've probably met him because he's been doing everything. So huge thanks to Matt. Just really, you know, he when I said we should really try this, and he actually trusted me and went there. So I appreciate that. So let's. And now to close out our day, it's really my great pleasure to introduce my friend Sarah Kay from Prudential Financial to say a few words. Sarah is Vice President of Inclusive Solutions at Prudential Financial. In her current role, she leads strategic philanthropy and partnerships to help advance the company's purpose and commitment to inclusive economic growth. She oversees, I have to read this because her job changes a lot. She oversees philanthropic grants, business-aligned partnerships, and employee volunteer programs to expand work and wealth opportunities for financially vulnerable populations, build inclusive and equitable communities, advance racial equity and justice, and support disaster response and recovery efforts. She's been a big supporter of the Aspen Institute, of the work of the Economic Opportunities Program, and just a real delight always to work with, and also a great thought partner. So Sarah, thank you for being here. And let me roll.
Thank you so much, Maureen. I will keep it short because I know I'm at the close of the day. I'll say it's been such a great day just to listen to all of the great panelists. We've heard from investors and funders and researchers and government agencies, and just to see all of these people come together. I think this is, almost kind of years in the building to see so many people invested in this, and particularly to see the bipartisan level of support. A few of us were talking outside just how rare that is, unfortunately, in this economy today. I was here yesterday participating in another Hill briefing around baby bonds. And so this is all in an effort on how do we make sure that people have access to wealth building pathways for both the short term and the long term. And so for those of you who don't know, Prudential Financial, we are a global financial services company, and we were founded 148 years ago on the principle of equity, that financial security and the peace of mind that comes with it should be within reach for everyone. And so, we've heard a lot today about how wealth for everyday Americans is decreasing, yet the racial wealth disparities are ever increasing and continue to grow even more. And so at Prudential, we're really focused on how do we connect people to good jobs? How do we make sure that we're promoting practices and policies that are expanding wealth building opportunities and really looking at new innovative wealth building pathways like employee ownership? We know employee ownership keeps assets and commerce in communities. It helps maintain good jobs and really looks at how do you create vibrant local economies and making sure that we have a shared prosperity. And so we hope that you will continue to advocate and join and help businesses, whether it be small to large. We're really excited because this morning, the reason why I was late, we had a board meeting and we just approved, so Hillary, 2 grants to Ownership Works and Project Equity for $3 million. So we're really happy to say that was unanimously approved. And we continue to champion all the work that you all are doing because we know this is so important to even local communities, but at the state and the federal level, and all again in the effort to make sure that we are helping people create wealth. So I thank everyone today, and I look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow as well. And thank you so much to Maureen and the Aspen team, to Joe. I also want to recognize Paula, who leads our work and wealth portfolio here, who's with us today as well too. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Great job. Really appreciate it. Thank you for doing this.